Admiral Halsey made it clear before we entered the South China Sea in January 1945. Any enemy ship we spotted, we would destroy, and sure enough, we followed through. I was there as a 22-year-old fire control technician aboard the USS New Jersey, the lead vessel of Task Force 38, when we transformed Japan's critical supply route into a floating grave. The waters that once carried the vital goods powering their military became a wasteland of wreckage and drifting oil. Within just 10 days, we sank more than 300,000 tons of enemy cargo and wiped out over 600 Japanese aircraft. But on that early morning, as we cruised through the shadowy darkness toward the shores of French Indochina, all I could focus on was the weight of the mission ahead. The ocean stretched out endlessly, black and still beneath the winter stars, disturbed only by the wake trailing behind our massive armada. At my post in the fire control tower of the New Jersey, I scanned the dark outlines of nearby ships gliding in precise formation. We had 16 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, 15 cruisers, and 58 destroyers, an unmatched force. Task Force 38 was now the cutting edge of America's power in the Pacific. Wielded with cold efficiency by Admiral Halsey, Martinez, our chief petty officer, shouted across the tight space, asking if I could spot anything on the radar. The screen flickered with faint signals, mostly Allied vessels. But we all knew that just beyond our perimeter lay enemy forces. Nothing threatening yet, Chief, I told him, while fine-tuning the radar. Still, a heavy sense of anticipation sat deep in my gut. We were moving into Japanese-dominated waters, further than any Allied ships had gone since the conflict began. The South China Sea was their artery, linking the rich resources of Southeast Asia to their homeland. That night, our mission was to sever it. Admiral Halsey's voice rang out from the command deck over the ship's intercom. He addressed the entire fleet, announcing that we were about to strike where the enemy felt safest. For years, Japanese convoys had traveled these routes untouched, moving fuel, rubber, and materials that kept their military running. That era ended now. Any enemy ship we saw would be sunk. Any military base we came across would be annihilated. The message was clear. The Japanese Empire would now feel the full force of the U.S. Navy. Around me, the crew stiffened with resolve. After more than 3 years of fighting, capturing territory one bloody step at a time, we finally had the power to go on the offensive. The defensive days were gone. We were now the aggressors, and the Japanese would be running from us. As light broke over the horizon on January 12, 1945, we caught our first glimpse of the target through the fog. The coastline of French Indochina, particularly the ports of Saigon and Cap Saint-Jacques. Intelligence indicated that these docks were crammed with Japanese shipping, everything from oil tankers to small freight ships, all vital to their war effort. The alarm rang out, calling all aircrews to their planes. Across the fleet's carriers, pilots rushed to action. Through my binoculars, I watched as the first attack planes launched from the USS Essex. Their engines roared as they climbed into the sky. Hellcat fighters, Helldiver bombers, and Avenger torpedo planes, all heavily armed. The radio came alive. With instructions, the pilots were told to prioritize enemy ships and naval vessels in Saigon's harbor, with secondary goals of damaging port infrastructure and fuel depots. Anything bearing the Japanese flag was considered a valid target. From my perch in the control tower, I had a clear line of sight as the attack began. At exactly 0800, the first bombs detonated, sending plumes of smoke rising high above the harbor. I watched through the optics as Japanese vessels desperately tried to escape the crowded waters, but it was hopeless. Our aviators descended with the discipline and force that had earned them fearsome reputations. One enormous tanker likely filled with crude from the Dutch East Indies took 3 direct torpedo strikes. The resulting explosion was enormous, a fiery blast visible even 20 miles out to sea. The force of the blast reached us shortly after, rumbling like distant thunder through the steel hull of our ship. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, leading the torpedo bombers, shouted excitedly over the radio that they had just destroyed the large vessel, codenamed Big Boy. With that target gone, they turned their attention to others. Within 2 hours, Saigon's port resembled a burning inferno. Ships lay capsized or sinking, with fires raging unchecked. Fuel tanks ignited, sending smoke columns high into the sky. The Japanese hadn't expected this. Their few defensive aircraft were quickly overwhelmed by our superior numbers and tactics, but this was only the opening blow. Admiral Halsey made it clear before we entered the South China Sea in January 1945. Any enemy ship we spotted, we would destroy. And sure enough, we followed through. I was there as a 22-year-old fire control technician aboard the USS New Jersey, the lead vessel of Task Force 38, when we transformed Japan's critical supply route into a floating grave. The waters that once carried the vital goods powering their military became a wasteland of wreckage and drifting oil. Within just 10 days, we sank more than 300,000 tons of enemy cargo and wiped out over 600 Japanese aircraft. But on that early morning, as we cruised through the shadowy darkness toward the shores of French Indochina, all I could focus on was the weight of the mission ahead. The ocean stretched out endlessly, black and still beneath the winter stars, disturbed only by the wake trailing behind our massive armada. At my post in the fire control tower of the New Jersey, I scanned the dark outlines of nearby ships gliding in precise formation. We had 16 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, 15 cruisers, and 58 destroyers, an unmatched force. Task Force 38 was now the cutting edge of America's power in the Pacific. Wielded with cold efficiency by Admiral Halsey, Martinez, our chief petty officer, shouted across the tight space, asking if I could spot anything on the radar. The screen flickered with faint signals, mostly Allied vessels. But we all knew that just beyond our perimeter lay enemy forces. Nothing threatening yet, Chief, I told him, while fine-tuning the radar. Still, a heavy sense of anticipation sat deep in my gut. We were moving into Japanese-dominated waters, further than any Allied ships had gone since the conflict began. The South China Sea was their artery, linking the rich resources of Southeast Asia to their homeland. That night, our mission was to sever it. Admiral Halsey's voice rang out from the command deck over the ship's intercom. He addressed the entire fleet, announcing that we were about to strike where the enemy felt safest. For years, Japanese convoys had traveled these routes untouched, moving fuel, rubber, and materials that kept their military running. That era ended now. Any enemy ship we saw would be sunk. Any military base we came across would be annihilated. The message was clear. The Japanese Empire would now feel the full force of the U.S. Navy. Around me, the crew stiffened with resolve. After more than 3 years of fighting, capturing territory one bloody step at a time, we finally had the power to go on the offensive. The defensive days were gone. We were now the aggressors, and the Japanese would be running from us. As our aircraft returned to the carriers, Admiral Halsey was already orchestrating the next strike. This mission had drawn first blood, but the real objective lay ahead: the main shipping lanes connecting Singapore to Japan. Dozens of vessels used those routes, guarded carefully in convoy formations. By the afternoon of January 12th, our force took on a new formless, a traditional navy, and more a roaming pack of predators. Our destroyers and cruisers fanned out across the sea, while fighter patrols scoured the area for targets. Then came the moment everything shifted. Ensign Bradley, still green from radar training, suddenly tensed as he studied his screen. Contact, bearing 270, distance, 15 miles. Multiple large targets, looks like a convoy, he reported. Martinez was at his side in an instant. How many? He asked. At least 20, Bradley replied, and their big word spread through the crew almost instantly. This wasn't just another small fleet, it was a significant supply group, one of the arteries feeding Japan's war effort. Admiral Halsey's team plotted an intercept course without delay, and soon the entire formation veered to engage. Through our long-range optics, the Japanese group came into view. A dozen cargo and fuel ships moved at the center, surrounded by 8 escort vessels, forming a defensive screen. They were moving quickly, maybe 20 knots, but they might as well have been standing still. Our ships could reach 30 knots when necessary. This was one of those times. Alarms sounded throughout the fleet, summoning every man to his combat station. I double-checked my targeting systems, ensuring everything was aligned and operational. The New Jersey's massive 16-inch guns could eliminate enemy warships with ease, but the Admiral chose a different tactic. Instead of engaging with our cannons, he ordered a full-scale air assault. Wave after wave of aircraft took off, converging on the convoy from all angles to overwhelm their defenses. The Japanese escorts fired back fiercely, filling the skies with flak, but they were vastly outmatched. Our Hellcats struck first, raking the decks and gun emplacements of the enemy ships. Then came the dive bombers, screaming down from the skies to drop their payloads with lethal precision. One Japanese destroyer, later identified as the Shimakaze, took a direct hit. The explosion tore the ship in two, and both sections sank swiftly, taking most of the crew with them. But the most damage came from the torpedo planes. Flying just above the waves to avoid detection, the Avengers dropped their torpedoes with deadly accuracy. One after another, the cargo ships and tankers were hit. Water rushed in through massive breaches, causing the ships to tilt and stall. One of our pilots radioed, "Another one's fish food. Big tanker, maybe 10,000 tons. She's sinking fast." The battle lasted less than 3 hours. By the end, 18 out of the 20 Japanese ships were gone, lying at the bottom of the sea. The 2 that escaped were both heavily damaged, leaking fuel and barely afloat as they crept toward Singapore. It's unlikely they ever made it. That night, sailing through wreckage and shimmering oil trails, Admiral Halsey addressed the fleet. Again, he announced that we had destroyed more enemy shipping in one day than some navies managed in half a year. But he wasn't finished. Intelligence suggested there were still dozens of convoys operating nearby, and we were going after every one of them. The following morning brought another target. A Japanese submarine surfaced near our fleet, likely trying to transmit our location. It never got the chance. The USS O'Brien spotted it and immediately opened fire. The sub attempted to dive, but our ships had spent years perfecting anti-sub tactics. Depth charges rained down until an oily mix of debris floated to the surface. "One less to worry about," reported Commander Williams from the O'Brien. No words getting back to Tokyo from her. By January 15th, we were advancing northward toward the heavily defended island, then known as Formosa, now called Taiwan. The Japanese had transformed the island into a key military stronghold, building numerous airstrips and heavily defended naval facilities. This would be our first real test against a well-prepared enemy. Formosa loomed ahead, its rugged terrain, cloaked in mist, and its shores lined with enemy artillery. For years, this island had functioned like a stationary aircraft carrier, launching strikes against Allied vessels and supporting Japanese advances across the Western Pacific. But Task Force 38 had arrived to put an end to that. As we neared the island, Admiral Halsey convened his command staff in the New Jersey's operations room. I was there, working as part of the fire control team, relaying targeting information between our forces in the air and at sea. There was a serious but steady energy in the room. We'd already proven our strength against enemy shipping, but this was a new kind of fight against a dug-in, reinforced position. Captain Reynolds, the intelligence officer, briefed us on what we were up against. Over 200 enemy aircraft were stationed on the island, he reported, operating from at least 6 airstrips, all protected by dense anti-aircraft defenses. Their naval strongholds in the ports of Kong and Kaohsiung were fortified with coastal artillery, some with guns as large as 8 inches. The Admiral studied the aerial photos spread out before him. When he asked for the number of ships anchored in those ports, Reynolds replied that there were at least 40. Most were smaller submarines. Destroyers, patrol craft, but among them were a heavy cruiser and 2 light cruisers. Halsey's expression hardened. These ships, he said, were the last significant Japanese surface fleet in the region, and we would eliminate them all. Before daylight on January 15th, we launched the largest aerial assault Task Force 38 had ever coordinated. More than 400 planes roared into the sky, their engines rumbling like a coming storm. I watched them form up in the darkness, their position lights blinking like stars, ready to strike. The first objective was the airstrip at Tainan, where enemy aircraft were already being prepped for takeoff to intercept us. But our airmen knew exactly what to do. They flew in fast, staying low, and attacked the enemy aircraft while they were still grounded. "I see targets on the runway," radioed Commander Peterson, leading a group of Hellcats. "Don't let them lift off." Through binoculars, I saw the strikes begin. Explosions lit up the runways as our dive bombers scored direct hits. Enemy planes caught fueling or taxiing were reduced to fireballs. The few that managed to get airborne were outnumbered and outmatched, quickly falling to our fighters. But the defenders weren't finished. As the second wave approached, hidden gun emplacements on the hills opened fire, filling the sky with deadly bursts. Then came the chilling call over the radio. One of our own had been hit. Lieutenant Jimmy Walsh, a young pilot from Ohio on his first combat sortie, had taken a direct hit from anti-aircraft fire. His aircraft was trailing smoke and losing altitude, but instead of bailing out behind enemy lines, he aimed his damaged plane at a Japanese munitions depot. "I'm making one last pass," he said over the radio. "Tell my parents I gave it everything I had." His plane slammed into the depot and triggered a massive explosion that could be seen miles away. The blast destroyed a large section of the base and ignited secondary detonations that burned for hours. Walsh didn't survive, but his sacrifice crippled Japanese operations on the island for months to come. By midday, our air wings held complete dominance above Formosa. With their aerial defenses shattered, we turned our focus to their fleet in the harbors. The heavy cruiser Myoko, a flagship of Japan's 8th Fleet, stood no chance. She was struck by 3 torpedoes and sank swiftly, dragging most of her sailors with her. The 2 lighter cruisers also met their end. The Ojoto attempted to flee killing harbor but was intercepted by dive bombers and sunk before making it past the breakwater. The Sakawa managed to get into open waters, but our fighters caught up and pounded her until she capsized. "That's the end of their fleet here," remarked Captain Morrison, our air operations chief. "Without those ships, their convoys are unprotected." But Admiral Halsey wasn't interested in stopping at warships. All afternoon, our squadrons picked off anything that contributed to Formosa's role as a military hub. Docks, storage, tanks, engine shops, ammunition bunkers. Nothing was left untouched. Toward sunset, the Japanese tried a final, desperate move. A few remaining enemy planes, likely flown by suicide pilots, attempted to break through and strike our fleet. They didn't get far. Our radar systems picked them up 30 miles out, and our interceptors shot down every one. "That's the last of their air cover," radioed Lieutenant Commander Davis. As darkness fell, the island burned. The fires could be seen from 100 miles away, and by morning, thick smoke still hung in the sky. In a single day, our task force had wiped out Japan's final stronghold between the Philippines and the home islands. By January 16, 1945, We had accomplished what many believed impossible: complete domination over an entire sea. The South China Sea, once Japan's secure route, now belonged to us. Every ship we found was destroyed. Every aircraft that challenged us shot down. Their flag had vanished from these waters, replaced by ours, flying proudly over the waves. Our next objective took us toward Hong Kong and the Pearl River region. Intelligence had pinpointed a large cluster of Japanese ships docked in the protected harbor of Canton. Admiral Halsey made it clear every one of those ships would be hunted down. I remember being on the bridge wing of the New Jersey as we approached the coast of China. The morning sky was clear as crystal, and I could see the mountains around Hong Kong rising from the sea like old stone guardians. But those guardians had fallen. Japan had taken Hong Kong back in 1941, and it now served as a key node in their supply system. Chief Martinez scanned the harbor through his binoculars. "That place is crawling with ships," he said. I looked, too, and counted at least 20 merchant vessels, along with destroyers and submarines. The Japanese must have believed they were safe under the cover of nearby airbases and shore guns. They were mistaken. The attack began at 9 in the morning with a powerful fighter sweep that cleared the sky. Enemy planes that attempted to intercept us were quickly destroyed. Within an hour, our pilots had full control over the Pearl River Delta. Enemy aircraft eliminated, reported Major Stevens from our Marine Squadron. "We own the airspace now, sir." With aerial resistance gone, our bombers and torpedo planes moved in. The narrow waters of the harbor worked against the enemy. This time there was no room to escape. Their ships were exposed, easy targets. The destroyer, Yukazi, an experienced veteran of many fights, attempted to escape. Her guns fired furiously, and for a moment it looked like she might slip away. But Commander Harrison, leading a group of Avengers, pressed forward despite the flak. 2 torpedoes hit dead center, and the destroyer went under in under 5 minutes. The merchant fleet suffered even worse. Unlike warships, they had no speed or agility to avoid attack. They sat helplessly as bomb after bomb found its mark. The harbor turned dark with smoke and burning oil as ship after ship went down. Seaman Collins, a young sailor beside me, muttered in disbelief, "It's a slaughter." And it was. But this was war, and those ships were moving weapons and fuel. 2 enemy forces fighting us in the Philippines and beyond. Every one destroyed meant fewer supplies reaching the front lines, fewer threats to our troops, and one step closer to ending the conflict. By nightfall, Hong Kong harbor was unrecognizable. Sunken ships jutted from the water, and fires still burned across the surface. The Japanese forces on land could do nothing but watch as their connection to the homeland was permanently cut. But we weren't finished yet. Intelligence picked up one final major target: a convoy fleeing from Canton, trying to escape downriver before we could intercept. Admiral Halsey ordered immediate pursuit. As the sun set, our fastest destroyers surged ahead, while our carriers sent out night-flying aircraft to support the chase. A Japanese formation made up of 8 sizable transport vessels and 4 accompanying destroyers was spotted, all carrying crucial goods intended for the homeland. Commander Mitchell, leading the destroyer, USS Nicholas, was the first to encounter them as they exited the Pearl River and entered the open sea. His message broke through on the radio. "This is Nicholas to Task Force 38. I've got them in sight. They're moving at top speed, but we're closing in fast." What followed was an extended nighttime skirmish. Our destroyers took advantage of their faster speed and advanced radar systems to stay just beyond reach of the Japanese guns, while directing aerial attacks launched from our carriers. Gradually, each of the enemy ships was located and taken out. The last destroyer, named Hamikaze, mounted a final, defiant stand. In an attempt to give the rest of the convoy a chance to flee, its captain turned the vessel straight toward group. Though courageous, it was ultimately in vain. 3 of our destroyers fired in unison, and the Japanese ship was overwhelmed within minutes. "Hamikaze is sinking," Mitchell relayed. "She's firing signal flares, likely trying to alert the freighters to scatter." It made no difference. Our pilots, flying under cover of darkness, located and destroyed the separated cargo ships one after another. By sunrise on January 17th, all 8 had been sunk, along with their protectors. A shipment meant to reinforce Japan's war effort had instead added to our growing list of victories. By January 21, 1945, the mission, known as Operation Gratitude, was drawing to a close. But the extent of the damage inflicted on the enemy was unlike anything their Navy had encountered since the beginning of the war. In just 10 days, Task Force 38 had sent more than 100 Japanese ships to the ocean floor, totaling over 300,000 tons. More than 600 aircraft had been destroyed. 2 major military installations had been leveled, and Japan's primary maritime supply routes had been severed. I stood on the deck of the New Jersey, watching the sun dip below the horizon as we departed the South China Sea. The ocean was serene, but hidden beneath its surface were the broken remains of Japan's naval presence. Oil slicks still floated on the waves, marking the sites of sunken vessels, while driftwood, torn canvas, and occasional personal items belonging to lost sailors gently struck the ship's side. The weight of what we had done hung heavy. Conservative estimates suggested that over 10,000 enemy personnel had perished, many trapped inside their ships as they sank into icy waters. Our own casualties were light by comparison, fewer than 50 aircraft lost, with perhaps 200 American aviators killed or unaccounted for. It was a decisive and overwhelming win, but even those lower numbers meant lives cut short, families broken. As I stood alongside Chief Martinez, gazing at the fading light, he turned to me and asked, "Thompson, what do you think all this means? I mean, in terms of the bigger picture." I took a moment before replying. "It means we've broken their ability to keep fighting, Chief. Without the supplies from Southeast Asia, Japan's war effort can't keep going. They won't give up right away, but from here on, they can't win." Looking back now, I see that conclusion was absolutely correct. The attack in the South China Sea had done more than destroy ships. It had crippled the Empire's capacity to continue the war, deprived of petroleum from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, and essential materials from French Indochina. Japan's industrial and military engine was doomed to slow down and stop. As we made our way back to the Philippines, Admiral Halsey addressed the fleet one final time. His words rang with pride. "Sailors of Task Force 38, you've made history. In just 10 days, you've accomplished what many believed impossible. You've forced the Japanese Navy from these waters and cut off their most vital logistics routes. The ships destroyed will no longer bring supplies to Japan. The planes we eliminated won't threaten American troops again. The installations we struck won't endanger Allied operations anymore. You've delivered a blow for freedom that will be remembered." And while I felt proud of our success, I couldn't push aside the haunting image of those enemy vessels sinking, their crews caught inside as seawater rushed in. War is brutal, no matter how justified the cause, no matter how clear the victory. Every win comes at a cost, measured in human lives. Japan had triggered this conflict with the surprise assault on Pearl Harbor, killing thousands of American servicemen in their beds or during breakfast. Since then, they had waged a campaign filled with cruelty, taking over entire territories and committing unspeakable acts. Their methods had left no room for peace talks or compromise. But now, as the echoes of battle faded behind us, I couldn't help thinking about the mothers in Japan who would never welcome their sons home, or the wives who would wait forever for husbands lost at sea. War turns potential friends into bitter enemies, and victory doesn't erase the sorrow of loss. Still, what we had done had to be done. The military leadership in Japan had brought this war upon the world, and America had responded with precision and overwhelming force. We had proven that the U.S. Navy could reach anywhere, and that no location was safe for the enemy. Beyond the immediate results, the message was clear. With Task Force 38 operating freely in waters previously dominated by Japan, the Pacific had effectively become controlled by the United States. Enemy units everywhere had to accept that no base or route was out of reach. At any time, the horizon might fill with American ships, and the skies could swarm with our aircraft. As our fleet vanished into the night, I reflected on the distance we had come since those grim days in 1942, when Japan seemed unbeatable. Back then, we had struggled just to hold on to Guadalcanal, to Midway, while desperately building the resources needed to push back. But now, in early 1945, we were the ones setting the pace, choosing the battles, and winning them decisively. The campaign in the South China Sea wasn't just a military win, it was a display of America's unmatched production capacity and logistical strength. The vessels that carried us were built by American hands. The planes that rained destruction had come from our own factories. The fuel, ammunition, and food, all made possible by a nation united in full-scale war mobilization. But most importantly, our success had been secured by the courage and commitment of American personnel, sailors, soldiers, Marines, and airmen who answered the call. They had left their homes and civilian lives behind to master the skills of warfare and used them with discipline and resolve that no enemy could rival. As our ships disappeared into the open ocean, the South China Sea began to grow quiet again. Survivors from the Japanese fleet clung to bits of wreckage, unsure if rescue would come. Oil fires on the water gradually burned out. The waves resumed their eternal rhythm, slowly washing away the last signs of battle. But everything had changed. Japan's critical link to Southeast Asia had been broken, never to be repaired. In the following months, their economy of war would begin to unravel as reserves dwindled and no new materials arrived. The path that would lead to Tokyo Bay and ultimate triumph had been cleared through the devastation left behind in those waters. Every vessel we found, we destroyed. Halsey's words had proven true. And with that, we had brought the end of the most devastating conflict in human history one step closer. The sacrifice had been immense, but the purpose was clear and final. Victory was now within sight. In the end, The South China Sea operation was more than a battle, it was a turning point. It marked the moment when the tide of war fully shifted, when Japan's grip on the Pacific began to slip for good. Behind every ship sunk and every victory claimed were lives forever changed on both sides. It's easy to count ships and tally up tonnage, but the real cost of war is measured in the silence that follows, in the faces that never return, in the empty places at dinner tables around the world. What happened in those waters helped bring an end to a long and brutal conflict, but it also serves as a reminder. Even the most necessary victories carry deep human weight. As we look back today, we honor not just the strength and strategy that led to triumph, but the sacrifices made by so many to reach that point. Because history isn't just about what was won, it's about who was lost, and the lessons we carry.